The silence in this room is the most expensive thing I own. It's a thick, soundproofed quiet, the kind you only find in recording studios or the tombs of forgotten kings. From my chair, a custom-built Chesterfield in oxblood leather, not the standard-issue vinyl recliner, I can look out the reinforced window and see the manicured lawns of my kingdom. Most people who live here call it Golden Meadows Senior Living. I just call it mine. And my children, the ones who put me here, they have another name for it. Fortress. Prison. The place they can't get into. It all started with a bird bath, a silly concrete thing I'd had in the garden for 30 years. My late husband, Arthur, bought it for me after I'd managed to turn a patch of stubborn clay into a rose garden that was the envy of the neighbourhood. One Tuesday morning in April, I was out there, deadheading the peace roses, when I tripped over a loose paving stone. It wasn't a dramatic fall, more of a slow, undignified crumple onto the damp grass. The worst I got was a bruised hip and a deeper bruise to my pride. But to my children, Robert and Jessica, that fall was a starting pistol. They descended on my house that weekend, their faces etched with a carefully rehearsed concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. Robert, my son, a man who manages other people's fortunes and dresses in suits so sharp they could cut glass, led the charge. He sat opposite me in the living room Arthur and I had built, his polished Italian shoes tapping a restless rhythm on the Persian rug. "Mum," he began, leaning forward, his voice a low, reasonable hum. "We need to talk about your safety. This house, it's too much for you now." Jessica, my daughter, an artist whose canvases were as blank as her promises, sat beside him, nodding earnestly. She reached over and patted my hand, her touch light and fleeting, like a butterfly with an urgent appointment elsewhere. "We're just worried, Mummy. What if you'd fallen and no one was around? You could have been lying there for hours." They had it all planned out. They'd done research. They had brochures, glossy pamphlets filled with smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard and participating in watercolor classes. The place was called Golden Meadows. It was, Robert assured me, the best facility in the state. "It's not a nursing home, Mum," he'd said, correcting my horrified whisper. "It's an assisted living community. There's a difference." "Oh, there's a difference, all right. One is a place you go to live. The other is a place you go to wait." I refused. I was Clara Sterling, 74 years old, a woman who had co-founded a multi-million-dollar logistics company with her husband from a card table in their garage. I had negotiated contracts with union bosses who chewed nails for breakfast. I had stared down corporate raiders in the 80s. I was not going to be defeated by a bird bath. "This is my home," I said, my voice as firm as I could make it. "Arthur and I built this house. Every nail, every board has a memory. I'm not leaving." That's when they played their trump card. They'd already consulted with a Dr. Peterson, a geriatric specialist I'd never met. They had a report: cognitive decline, impaired judgment, at risk. They used words like liability and guardianship. It wasn't a discussion, it was a sentencing. My own son, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, was threatening to have me declared incompetent. The fight went out of me then. It was like a string had been cut inside, the one that held me upright. I looked at Robert's cold, determined face and Jessica's tear-filled, guilt-ridden eyes, and I saw that I had already lost. They didn't see their mother anymore. They saw a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. The house, the stocks, the company shares Arthur had left me. It was all tied up in a neat little package called Mom, and the package was becoming inconvenient. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the lobby of Golden Meadows. The air smelled of disinfectant and despair. A cheerful young woman named Brenda pinned a name tag to my cardigan. Clara S. not even my full name. I was an initial now. A case file. They gave me a room at the end of a long beige corridor. It had a single bed, a small dresser, a chair, and a window that overlooked the parking lot. My beautiful, sprawling home with its rose garden was sold in less than a month. Robert handled the transaction, of course. "To cover your expenses, Mum," he'd explained. "Golden Meadows isn't cheap." The first few months were a blur of scheduled activities I had no interest in and meals that tasted of nothing. My children visited every Sunday. They'd bring flowers that would wilt by Tuesday and sit with me for a precisely measured hour. They'd talk at me, not to me, about their busy lives. Robert's portfolio was up 7%. Jessica was having an artistic breakthrough with shades of grey. They'd ask me if I was settling in, if I'd made any friends, their questions as hollow as their smiles. They never asked if I was happy. They never asked if I was lonely. They never asked if my heart was breaking. The loneliness was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered me at night. I missed the smell of my own kitchen, the feel of Arthur's favourite armchair, the sound of the wind chimes on the porch. Here the only sounds were the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum and the distant, mournful wail of a television in the common room. I was fading. I knew it. I was becoming one of the ghosts that drifted down these hallways, a person whose stories were already finished. Then came the incident that relit the fire. It was a rainy Tuesday. About 6 months into my sentence, a new resident had moved in across the hall. A frail woman named Mary, whose family had dumped her with 3 suitcases and hadn't been back since. That afternoon, a courier delivered a large manila envelope for me. It was from Robert's office. I assumed it was some tax form or a routine statement. But my hands, stiff with arthritis, fumbled with the clasp. The contents spilled onto my lap. Among the neatly printed financial summaries was a sheet that had clearly been included by mistake. It was a copy of an email chain between Robert and his lawyer. The subject line was, "CS Asset Liquidation and Durable POA Strategy. CS Clara Sterling." Me. I read it, my blood turning to ice. They weren't just managing my expenses. They were systematically dismantling my life's work. They were arguing for durable power of attorney, using Dr. Peterson's report and a new one from the facility's on-call physician as evidence of my continued cognitive decline. Their goal was to gain full control, to sell off my remaining shares in the company, to empty the coffers that Arthur and I had bled and sweat to fill. My exorbitant living costs were the justification. The email that broke me was from Robert to his sister. "Jess, we have to push this through. The market is peaking, and her portfolio is prime for reallocation. It's what Dad would have wanted, for the assets to be actively managed for future generations. She's not capable of it anymore. This is for the best." For the best? The same words they used to lock me away. They were using my money to pay for my own prison while they plotted to steal the rest of it. A cold, hard fury, an emotion I hadn't felt since Arthur died, rose up in me. It was a resurrection. The ghost of Clara Sterling, the businesswoman, the negotiator, the fighter, opened her eyes. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the vinyl chair, the damning email clutched in my hand. And I planned. They had underestimated me. They saw a frail, confused old woman. They had forgotten who I was. I had one weapon they didn't know about, a secret Arthur and I had set up years ago as a failsafe against a hostile takeover, a series of offshore trusts and holding companies managed by a man as discreet as he was ruthless. Our old family lawyer, a man they thought long retired, Jonathan Hemlock. The next morning, I used my weekly supervised phone call to dial a number I hadn't used in a decade. I didn't call my children. I called my lawyer. Mr. Hemlock, I said, my voice low and steady. It's Clara Sterling. I have a business proposition for you. I need you to buy me a nursing home. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then a low chuckle. Clara, I was wondering when you'd call. I've been reading the papers. Tell me everything. And I did. I told him about the fall, the betrayal, the emails. I told him about the bland food and the beige walls. When I was finished, there was another silence. The parent company of Golden Meadows, he said finally, his voice all business now, is a private equity firm called Silver Arch Capital. They've been buying up mid-range elder care facilities and stripping them for parts. They're over-leveraged and looking for a quiet exit. It will be expensive, Clara, but it can be done. It will have to be done through layers of shell corporations. They'll never know who the ultimate buyer is until it's too late. Excellent, I said. Spare no expense, Jonathan. And one more thing. When the deal is done, I want to be the one to announce it. The next 3 months were the most alive I'd felt in years. I played the part of the docile resident to perfection. I finger-painted in art class. I nodded along to Brenda's cheerful chatter. I smiled vacantly at my children on Sundays, letting them prattle on about their lives while a corporate war was being waged in my name from a law office in Zurich. Jonathan and I communicated through coded letters he sent, disguised as updates from a fictitious book club. A reference to the Count of Monte Cristo meant the initial offer was accepted. A line about the art of war signaled a tough negotiation. Finally, a postcard arrived. It was a picture of a sunrise over the Swiss Alps. On the back, in Jonathan's neat script, it said, "The eagle has landed. Welcome to your new home. For real this time." The following Monday, the regional director of Silver Arch Capital, a portly man named Mr. Davies, arrived for a surprise inspection. The facility manager, a harried woman named Patricia, was in a panic. He called a mandatory all-staff meeting in the dining hall. I, as a resident, was not supposed to be there, but I slipped in and sat in the back, looking for all the world like a lost old woman who'd wandered into the wrong room. Mr. Davies cleared his throat and announced that Silver Arch Capital had been acquired. The entire portfolio, including all 23 of its senior living facilities, had been sold to a private investment group based in Geneva. A murmur went through the staff. They were worried about their jobs, their pensions. The new ownership, Mr. Davies continued, consulting his notes, has decided to take a more hands-on approach. In fact, the new CEO of the parent company has insisted on personally overseeing the transition at this flagship facility. She's here today. Heads turned, scanning the room for some corporate shark in a pantsuit. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, my old bones creaking in protest. I walked to the front of the room, my cane tapping a steady, deliberate rhythm on the floor. I stood beside the podium, looking out at the sea of confused faces. Patricia, the manager, started to rush toward me, probably to escort me back to my room. I held up a hand, and she stopped. "My name is Clara Sterling," I announced, my voice clear and strong, amplified by the room's acoustics. "You may know me as the resident in room 21B. As of 9 a.m. this morning, you can also call me your new boss. I own this place." The silence that followed was more profound than any I had ever purchased. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. Mr. Davies looked like he'd swallowed a wasp. Patricia's jaw was on the floor. "There will be some changes around here," I continued, my eyes scanning the crowd. "First, the food budget is being tripled, effective immediately. Second, we will be hiring 15 new nurses and support staff. Pay will be increased by 20% across the board for all current employees. Your pensions are secure. We are in the business of care, not cost-cutting." A wave of relief and disbelief washed over the staff. A few of them started to clap. However, I said, my voice hardening as I turned to Patricia, management that signs off on fraudulent medical reports to assist in the financial abuse of its residents will not be tolerated. Patricia, you're fired. Security will escort you out. I had hired my own security, 2 large men who had been posing as landscape gardeners for the past week. They moved in swiftly. Patricia was speechless, her face a mask of horror. Then, I delivered the coup de grace. Finally, a new policy regarding visiting hours is being implemented. While we encourage families to visit, we must ensure a peaceful and stable environment for our residents. Therefore, all visiting hours are now restricted to between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. on weekdays. All visits must be approved by my office 48 hours in advance. I looked directly at the security camera in the corner of the room, the one I knew Robert sometimes used to check in on the facility's live feed. I gave it a small, cold smile. That will be all. Sunday came. At 10 a.m. sharp, Robert's Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, followed by Jessica's Volvo. They strode into the lobby, carrying a pot of orchids, their faces set in their usual Sunday masks of dutiful affection. They were met at the reception desk by one of my new security guards. "Can I help you?" the guard asked, not moving from his post in front of the hallway entrance. "We're here to see our mother, Clara Sterling," Robert said with an air of annoyance. "I'm sorry, sir. Visiting hours are not for another 17 hours, and I don't see your names on the approved list." Robert's face went from confused to thunderous in a heartbeat. "What are you talking about? We visit every Sunday. Get the manager." "I am the manager," I said, stepping out from my new office, Patricia's old one, already redecorated. Or, more accurately, the owner. The colour drained from their faces. They stared at me as if I were a ghost who had just materialised. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. Robert's briefcase slipped from his grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. "Mum," Jessica whispered. "What is this? What's going on?" "It's simple, dear," I said, enjoying every second of their disbelief. "I found your business plan for my life, the CS asset liquidation and durable POA strategy." It was quite the read, very thorough, a little light on human decency, but you can't have everything. So I decided to draft a strategy of my own. I walked over to a newly installed, very large, very official-looking sign on the wall. It was a mahogany plaque with gold lettering. Golden Meadows, Senior Living, a Sterling Holdings property, visiting hours. General, 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., Montfrey special exemption. Visiting hours for Robert and Jessica Thompson are hereby amended to Wednesdays, 2 a.m. to 2:15 a.m., by written appointment only. Robert read the sign, then looked at me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and sheer incomprehension. "You can't do this. This is insane. You're senile." "Am I?" I replied, my voice dangerously soft. "The board of Sterling Holdings, which is to say me, doesn't think so. The team of psychiatrists I hired to evaluate me last week don't think so. In fact, they found me to be of exceptionally sound mind. Their report has already been forwarded to a judge, along with copies of your emails. The petition for guardianship has been, well, let's just call it denied with prejudice." Jessica started to cry, real tears this time. "Mommy, please, this is a mistake. We love you. We were just trying to help." "You were trying to help yourselves," I snapped, the ice in my veins finally breaking. "To my home, to my money, to the life Arthur and I built from nothing. You put me in here to wait for death so you could pick over the bones. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but my schedule has changed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a facility to run. Security will show you out." They didn't move. They just stood there, utterly broken. It was everything I had dreamed of. A perfect, complete victory. I had taken back my power, my dignity, and my life. I had built a fortress around myself, and the architects of my prison were now locked outside it. I felt triumphant. I felt strong. I felt utterly, completely alone. The months that followed were a strange sort of paradise. I was the benevolent queen of Golden Meadows. I brought in chefs, artists, musicians. I planted a magnificent rose garden in the central courtyard, with a bird bath right in the middle. The residents adored me. The staff respected me. I had created the perfect world for myself. And every Wednesday at 2 a.m., my children would apply for their 15-minute slot. Sometimes I would grant it. They would appear, pale and sleep-deprived, in the sterile visiting room I'd had constructed. They would beg. They would apologize. They would plead. I would listen, my face a mask of stone, and then dismiss them when the alarm on my watch beeped. My revenge was a dish I ate cold, week after week. Then the real world, the one outside my gilded cage, intruded. The karma I had so meticulously designed for my children circled back, but with a ferocity that I could never have imagined. It started with a call from a hysterical Jessica at 3 o'clock in the morning. She wasn't calling for a visiting appointment. "It's Robert," she sobbed into the phone. "Oh God, Mum, it's Robert." Robert, the master of the universe, the financial genius, had over-leveraged himself. He'd been involved in a high-risk, high-reward hedge fund that had imploded spectacularly. But it was worse than that. To cover his initial losses, he had committed fraud. He had embezzled money from his clients' accounts. He was ruined. The SEC had frozen all his assets. The FBI had raided his home. He was facing charges that would put him in prison for the rest of his life. "He needs bail money, Mum," Jessica wept. "It's $5 million. The house is frozen. We have nothing. You're the only one who can help. Please. He's your son." My son. The same son who had tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my fortune. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I told her I'd think about it. For a week, I let them stew. I let them call, their desperation growing with each message. My victory was now absolute. Robert's fate was in my hands. I could save him, or I could let the justice system he held in such high regard swallow him whole. This, I thought, was the final act of my revenge play. I would grant them an audience. I would make them grovel in person. I decided to see them during their next 2 a.m. appointment. I would sit there, in my leather throne, and I would watch the last vestiges of their arrogance crumble before I delivered my final verdict. The night arrived. It was cold and raining, the drops beating a frantic tattoo against my window. At 1:55 a.m., the night nurse buzzed me. "Your visitors are here, Mrs. Sterling." "Send them to the main lounge," I commanded. "I'll be right down." I put on my silk dressing gown, the one I'd bought to celebrate the takeover. I felt a surge of power, a heady, dark intoxication. This was the culmination of everything. I was the master of my own fate, and theirs. I stood up from my Chesterfield, my hand steady, my resolve like steel. I took a step towards the door, and then the world tilted. A sudden, blinding flash of light exploded behind my eyes. An agony, sharp and electric, shot through the left side of my head. My legs gave out. The right side of my body went numb, as if it had been unplugged from my brain. I tried to call out, but my tongue was a clumsy, useless thing in my mouth. A garbled animal sound was all that escaped. I crashed to the floor, my head hitting the corner of a heavy oak table. My last conscious thought was of the irony. After all my planning, all my rage, all my glorious revenge, I was defeated not by my children, but by a tiny, traitorous blood vessel in my own brain. I woke up to the smell of disinfectant. I was in a bed, a hospital bed. But not in a hospital. I recognized the beige walls, the window that overlooked the parking lot. I was in room 21B, my old room. I tried to move, but I couldn't. The right side of my body was completely paralyzed. I tried to speak, to ask what had happened, but the words were trapped, a frantic jumble of signals that never reached their destination. My mind was a perfect, clear prison inside a broken body. A massive stroke, they would later call it. Aneurysm. A nurse came in. It was a new one I didn't recognize. She changed my drip with an air of bored efficiency. She didn't speak to me, only about me, to another nurse who stood in the doorway. The old owner. Tragic, really. The kids have power of attorney now, of course. Full control. My children. They came in later. Robert was out on bail. He looked tired and thin, but there was a new look in his eye. It wasn't fear. It was control. Jessica was with him. Her tears were gone. They stood at the foot of my bed. My bed. In my facility. "Hello, Mum," Robert said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Quite a turn of events, isn't it? The doctors say you have locked-in syndrome. You can understand everything, but you can't move or speak. A prisoner in your own head. How fitting." He picked up my limp right hand. "Don't you worry about a thing. Jessica and I will handle everything now. The company, the portfolio, the sale of this facility went through yesterday. We got a very good price for it. It was enough to cover my legal fees and then some. It's for the best, you see. We're managing the assets for future generations." He smiled, a thin, cruel slash across his face. The same smile I remembered from when he told me I had to leave my home. And so, here I lie. In the kingdom I built, now a prison I cannot escape. The silence I bought is now the silence I am trapped in. My children visit me every Sunday. They sit for their hour, discussing my finances, my care plan, the sale of my assets. They talk about me as if I'm not here. They never changed the visiting hours back. After all, why would they? They can come and go whenever they please. I took everything from them, and in a single, silent moment, fate handed it all back with interest. My revenge was perfect, my victory absolute, and my punishment is to live it. Every single, silent, screaming day,